They say there are stories that cling to the desert wind, whisper like prayers through canyon stone and dry mesquite. One of them is about a woman named Clara McGraw, who carried both life and death in her belly the summer her husband was murdered. Folks still say her shadow lingers in that frontier town, though the years have long since turned it to dust. I'll tell it as it was told to me, for a tale like this is too heavy to vanish. The year was 1879, and the town of Dry Creek sat like a blister under the sun. Its main road was nothing but a strip of packed dust, lined with crooked porches, a leaning saloon, and a church whose bell rang hollow when the wind pushed it. It was a kind of town where law came slow, where a man's courage was worth more than his badge, and where outlaws carved their names deeper than preachers carved scripture. That summer, Clara's husband, Samuel McGraw, met his end in the saloon, shot down by a man whose name carried more fear than the desert carried drought, Silas Crow. Folks said Samuel wasn't looking for trouble, only went in for supplies and a quick drink. But Crow was there with his men, drunk on whiskey and their own cruelty. Words were exchanged, sharp words, born from Crow mocking Samuel's clean hands and soft ways. Before anyone could blink, a pistol barked, and Samuel lay sprawled on the sawdust floor, blood soaking the boards where the piano had once played Sunday tunes. Silas Crow didn't run. He never did. He holstered his pistol slow, smiled wide as the room sat in terror, and raised a glass as if he'd swatted a fly. No lawman came. The sheriff was too old, too worn, and too afraid. Folks buried Samuel the next morning under blistering sun, while Crow and his gang laughed loud enough to echo across the town. And Clara, she stood silent at the grave, her belly heavy with child, her hands white against her black dress, her face pale as bone. People expected her to break, to collapse beneath sorrow. But Clara McGraw did not cry that day. She stared at the mound of earth, then at the wide sky, and whispered words only the wind and God heard. Asterisk, you'll not rest in shame, Samuel, not while I draw breath. Asterisk, from that moment, Dry Creek held its breath. Life for a widow was cruel enough on the frontier, crueler still for one with a child stirring inside her. Neighbors brought bread, but pity weighed more than the loaves. Some whispered she should sell the ranch, move east, find family. Others muttered she wouldn't last the winter. But Clara kept her silence. She fed the stock, mended fences, and by lamplight sat at the table long into the night. What folks didn't see was that her silence wasn't weakness. It was calculation. Clara had been raised by a man named Ezekiel Harper, her father a veteran of the war between the states. He was a man who carried the smell of gunpowder in his clothes and the discipline of a soldier in his blood. She learned to shoot before she was tall enough to see over the corral fence. By 14, she could split a pine not at 30 paces. By 16, she was known along the cattle trails as the ghost-eyed rider, a girl whose pale stare and dead quiet aim unsettled men twice her age. But war scars don't fade easy, and Ezekiel died with bitterness in his heart. Clara put her guns away then, swore never to live by the iron that stole her father's life. When Samuel came, a rancher gentle, slow to anger, she saw in him the chance to build something clean. She laid down her pistols, picked up the plow, and became a wife. She thought that part of her life had been buried, but Samuel's grave stirred it all back. Nights in Dry Creek grew heavy with rumor. Some said Clara was losing her mind. Others swore they'd seen her out by the canyon, practicing at dusk. Lantern light glinted off steel, and the sound of gunfire carried across the rocks. The coyotes howled back, but Clara never flinched. She was slower than she'd once been, her body heavy with child, but her aim was still sure. Each shot was a prayer, each bullet a promise. One evening, she went to the blacksmith, a man named Harlan Dobb, who'd known her father. She laid a quiet hand on his counter. "You still keep iron from the old days?" she asked. Harlan narrowed his eyes, saw the fire in hers, and said nothing. From under his bench, he pulled out a revolver wrapped in oilcloth, a Colt .45, blued steel, heavy as the past. Clara unwrapped it slow, ran her fingers along the barrel, and the blacksmith swore her eyes went paler, colder. She slid it into her satchel without another word. That night, Clara sat at her kitchen table. The house creaked with loneliness. The baby shifted inside her, and the only light was a trembling flame. She opened a small box, one she hadn't touched in years, and inside were bullets, carefully kept, polished like coins. She loaded the revolver, each click echoing through the silence like the toll of a bell. She whispered then, not to the child or the shadows, but to the graveyard outside. Asterisk, every graveyard grows heavier when men like Crow walk free. I'll not let it be. Asterisk. Meanwhile, Silas Crow swaggered through town as if he owned it. His men filled the saloon, their boots muddying the floor, their laughter souring the air. He was a tall man, scarred down his cheek, with eyes that looked through people as though they were already dead. Crow believed himself untouchable. No lawman had ever shackled him, no bullet had ever slowed him, and he liked to remind people of it. One afternoon, when the sun was high and the dust burned hot enough to scald, Clara stepped into town. She walked slow, her black dress clinging to her form, her hat shadowing her eyes. Every door creaked shut as she passed. Every curtain twitched. Crow leaned against a saloon post, smirking. "Well now," he drawled, voice thick with whiskey, "ain't this something? Widow McGraw, come to buy thread? Or did you just miss my company?" Laughter erupted from his men. Clara's eyes did not waver. "You killed my husband," she said. Her voice was flat, steady, as if carved from stone. Crow's smile widened, cruel and careless. "Man should have known better than to mouth me." He spat in the dirt. "You best learn, too." Clara turned then, not quick, not shaken, just turned and walked on. But the air shifted that day. Folks said the sun seemed to dim, and the wind carried whispers. She's not done. That night, Clara returned home and lit no lamp. She sat on her porch, the revolver in her lap, staring out at the horizon. The stars burned cold and countless above, but her mind was sharper still. She thought of Samuel, of his laugh, his hands, the way he dreamed of a future with cattle grazing and children running free. She thought of the baby pressing inside her ribs, unborn yet already part of the fight. And she thought of Crow, his smirk, his swagger, his bloodied hands. The coyotes cried again, distant but close enough to stir her heart. Clara whispered to the child, "Asterisk, you'll be born into a world where your father's name means something. I'll see to it." Asterisk. Her hand tightened on the revolver. The promise was set. And so the town of Dry Creek held its breath, waiting for the day the widow would step into the dust and face the man who thought himself deathless. They say when a storm gathers on the desert horizon, the air grows still, like the land itself is holding its breath. That's how it was in Dry Creek, the morning Clara McGraw walked into town for the last time. The sky was the color of tarnished silver, and even the horses stamped uneasy in their stalls. Word had spread, carried on hushed voices from porch to porch. The widow's going to face him. Folks lined the street, not close, but watching from shadows. Faces pressed against glass, boots planted on rickety porches, children clutching skirts. Nobody spoke above a whisper, for it felt like speaking too loud might shatter the moment, might call death down on them all. At the far end of that dust-choked street stood Silas Crow, leaning against a post, chewing on a matchstick, his pistol hanging loose at his hip. He wasn't worried. Why would he be? He'd stared down men who carried reputations like banners, and not one of them had lived to boast after. When he saw Clara, he laughed, long, low, and cruel. "Well, I'll be," he drawled, voice cutting through the silence. The widow finally crawls out her hole, belly and all. His men cackled, their laughter ringing off the saloon boards like rattlesnakes in heat. But there was an unease in it, too. Something about Clara's walk, a steady rhythm, boots whispering against the dirt, put a chill under their skin. Clara stopped in the middle of the street, the revolver hanging at her side, her black dress tugged by the wind. She looked not at Crow's men, not at the townsfolk, but straight at Silas. Her voice carried, clear as the church bell had once been. "You took Samuel McGraw from me. You laughed while the blood was still warm. Today, Silas, you'll answer for it." The outlaw spat into the dust, sneering. "You think you can stand against me? You're carrying a babe woman. You'll drop that iron before the babe drops you. But Clara didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. Crow smirked and straightened, rolling his shoulders. Fine then. Let's give these good people a show. Ain't often they see a funeral before noon. The street held its breath. The old men in town would later swear the air grew thick like honey and time itself slowed. Even the flies seemed to hover midair. Clara's hand hovered over her gun. Crow's eyes gleamed with surety. He moved first. Faster than most men could see. His pistol cleared leather with a flash of sun on steel. But Clara moved faster. Her revolver rose, not with the fumbling of grief, not with the trembling of a desperate widow, but with the fluid certainty of a gunslinger born for the draw. Her shot cracked through the silence, sharp as lightning splitting a summer sky. Crow staggered, eyes wide. The bullet struck square in his chest, blooming red against his shirt. His pistol fired wild, the shot cutting into nothing but air. Silas Crow fell to his knees, choking on disbelief. "You!" he rasped, blood bubbling at his lips. "You ain't just—" Clara stepped forward, revolver steady, eyes pale and unblinking. And then the truth spilled across the dust, not from her lips, but from the whispers of the crowd. Ghost-eyed rider. It spread like wildfire, a name long buried rising again. The ghost-eyed rider. The girl who rode with cattle drives and faced down raiders. The sharpshooter who disappeared years ago, rumored dead, rumored married, rumored gone. Now she stood, heavy with child, still holding the gaze that froze men's blood. Crow's breath rattled, then stilled. His body crumpled into the dirt, and for the first time in years, Dry Creek was free of his shadow. Silence hung thick. Then Crow's men, who thought themselves wolves, broke like startled deer. They scattered, boots pounding alleys, horses tearing away from their hitching posts. None dared raise a gun against a woman who had felled their leader in a single shot. The townsfolk stepped into the street, slow, uncertain. Men removed their hats. Women pressed hands to their lips. Children peeked from behind skirts. The sheriff, old and bent, limped forward and stared at the outlaw's corpse. Then at Clara. "You've done what I couldn't," he said, voice trembling. Clara holstered her revolver. Her face was carved from stone, but her voice was soft, tired. "This wasn't vengeance," she said. "It was justice." She turned then and began the long walk back through the dust. The crowd parted like water, watching her pass. No one spoke until she was gone from sight, only the sound of her boots and the rattle of the wind filling the air. That night, the saloon was quiet for the first time in months. No rowdy laughter, no gunfire, no crow. Folks spoke low, telling the story over and over, shaping it into legend before the day was done. They said her eyes glowed like ghost fire. They said the bullet she fired was guided by the hand of her dead husband. Some swore they saw her shadow stretch long and black across the whole street, taller than any man. And in her little ranch house, Claire McGraw laid her revolver on the table, set her hands against her belly, and whispered to her unborn child, "You'll be born into a world where your father's name still means something, and where your mother is more than a widow." Years passed, and the town changed. Railroads came, then faded. New sheriffs wore badges with brighter polish. But the story remained. An old storyteller, like me, still tells when the fire burns low and the desert wind howls against the shutters. He tells of the woman who carried life inside her and death at her hip, of the widow who faced Silas Crow and struck him down before the whole town. And he ends the same every time. Asterisk, when the wind whistles down the canyon, you can hear the echo of her boots still. For justice never dies, and neither do the legends of those who carry it. Asterisk,